All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here at the Princeton Public Library. My name is Nora. I am part of our programming team and part of our local history team, along with my colleague Dana. We are so thrilled to be partnering once again with the Historical Society of Princeton. This is actually the third part in a sort of three-part series the Historical Society has been doing on taverns. The first part we had here at Open Archive with them. Anybody come to that one? Yeah, a few folks. And then they were at, yes, Michael was here, then at Morven. So we've been celebrating tavern life in Princeton this fall. A couple quick programming reminders. We are going to be recording this program. So if you enjoy it, which we are sure you will, please feel free to share it after the fact. It will be available on our YouTube channel with friends and family. This room is equipped with a hearing loop. So if you have hearing aids or a cochlear implant that has a T-coil setting, you can feel free to turn that on and the sound will go directly into that. If you need assistance hearing, we have some compatible hearing headsets in the back that you can feel free to grab. Because of that, we will be using the microphone for the whole program, including for the Q&A later. We'll be running mics around, so we will ask you to speak into the mic to the best of your ability. We are here tonight for Michael C. Gabriele, an author, a journalist, a freelance writer. He has written Colonial Taverns of New Jersey, Libations, Liberty, and Revolution, as you see here. We were talking earlier about this area is so rich in history that there's just like, there's no way to capture it all at once. We're trying piece by piece to get through it. So tonight, Colonial Taverns. We have, of course, in 2026 coming up, the semi-quincentennial of the nation. So tonight you can start bolstering up all of your trivia to amaze your friends and befuddle your enemies. And Michael will have copies of his book available for sale following the program just up front here. So, in addition to Colonial Taverns, Michael is a writer on all sorts of New Jersey history, including bicycle racing, New Jersey folk revival music, and diners. I believe you have the diner book up here, too. Always bring the dining. He's a member of the Board of Trustees for the New Jersey Folk Festival at Rutgers University, a member of the executive boards for the Allied Artists of America, New York, the Nutley Historical Society, the Theater League of Clifton, and serves on the advisory board of the Clifton Arts Center. So he is out and about, he is very well informed, and he's going to talk to us tonight about Colonial Taverns. Please welcome Michael Gabriele.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight on this dark and stormy night. Hope it wasn't too bad. My name is Michael Gabriele. I'm an author with The History Press. That's my publisher. I've been doing books for them now for a number of years. This is actually my newest and fifth book with the History Press. All books on New Jersey history. That's what I write about, and that's their mantra is local history, local history. So I've come from far, far away. I'm from Clifton, New Jersey, exit 153 on the Parkway, by the way. So it wasn't a bad ride. So anyway, so thank you all for coming out tonight, and thank you to the library for hosting me for here, and also thank you to the Historical Society of Clifton of Princeton for me the co-sponsor. That's very nice. I very much appreciate that, as does my publisher. So yeah, there's a lot of history here in Princeton. Too much actually, but I'll try to break it down a little bit. I'll try to focus on a few things, but I got this. Whenever I do books for the History Press now, I've got a pretty good track record with them. So whenever I finish a book, the inside joke is always, okay, what's the next book going to be? And I say, well, I don't know. So, and that's what I said last time. I did a book, I said, I don't know. But I was working on a book a couple of years ago, the folk revival music of New Jersey. Yes, New Jersey is the place where the folk revival started. Don't let anybody tell you differently. It's controversial, but that's the way I think of it. And as I was doing that book, I wanted to delve way back into history, into the 1600s and 1700s. And I learned that folk music, as it is, was very popular with village taverns. This is a place where people would go to socialize, to drink and to talk about events, and also to sing. Somebody would get up and sing a traditional song from Scotland, Ireland, England, wherever, And this is actually the folk tradition. It's songs that are handed down generation to generation. So there's something, I don't know, there was something about that. I said, that's kind of nice. I kind of like that idea. People going to their colonial taverns in the late 1600s and the early 1700s and socializing and singing. I said, I kind of like that. So I had a book to finish, but I put that aside. I took some notes, and I said, I'm going to come back to that just to see what might be. So I put it aside, and I did come back to it a couple of years ago. And I'm a journalist. That's been my profession all these years. So in journalism, we're taught that you always follow your sources wherever they might lead. So I had this idea of colonial taverns and the place where people would meet and sing songs. I had no idea what it would, maybe nothing, maybe it would be a magazine article. I just wanted to follow it and see where it would lead. So I did. I started doing my due diligence, and I learned a number of things. Taverns were actually mandated by most villages. New Jersey is the corridor state, and even people way back then realized that people were going to be traveling from New York to Philadelphia. They were going to need places to stop along the way. It was a rather arduous 3-day journey by stage wagon. So you would need a place to stop and take care of the horses, and people would want something to drink, maybe something to eat, maybe even spend the night. So it was a hospitality business. I said, okay, that's kind of nice. Stagecoaches, well, they would follow the so-called colonial highways, which were mud and rocks. So it was kind of a tough trip. Taverns were the places where people would go in the village to gather their mail, to vote, to receive their friends at the local tavern. All right, that's kind of friendly. I like that. Taverns were places where the stagecoaches would deliver colonial newspapers of the day, and people who could would get up and read the newspapers out loud for those who were not literate. And so it was a place of ideas and sharing ideas. All right, this is kind of getting interesting. You would go, if you wanted to enlist in the militias, you would go to the taverns and do that. Taverns were the places where the local village governments would meet and discuss issues about finances and deeds and proclamations and ordinances. So they would go to a tavern. There was really nowhere else that could really support that kind of a thing. So they would do that. The local courts would often meet at a tavern and make judgments about certain disputes and things like that. All right, now we're kind of getting interesting here. George Washington would often commandeer taverns as his temporary headquarters. Oh, okay. And this is where he would generate he'd meet there with his generals, and he would draft his letters, and he was always on the move. I said, all right, that's kind of interesting. I learned from a West Coast legal scholar that meetings at taverns, at least in his opinion, form the basis of the Assembly Clause in the Constitution. Whoa! Now, I tracked him down, and he said yes. He wrote this in a journal, and he said yes. He said the tavern was a public venue, so especially in the mid-1700s, if you were complaining about the authorities and about this idea of taxes and business regulations, you could go to a tavern, and you'd have to be a little careful. You could speak your mind. Now, if you did that in some out-of-the-way cabin way out in the woods, and the British authorities caught you, then whoa, now you're in trouble. This is sedition. But if you did it at the tavern, this is a public venue. All right. And then finally, I hit on it. Taverns were the seedbeds of the Revolution. This is where the patriots and the loyalists would go and they would discuss political issues, and the patriots would hatch their plans and formulate their options about what they wanted to do. This idea of independence and revolution. These were words that you didn't say lightly. So independence and revolution. They would discuss this at a tavern. And again, you had to be a little careful, but it was the place where you would go to talk about these ideas. I learned from a scholar at Rutgers University that revolution, up until the mid-1770s, was something that would be unthinkable. I never knew this. I mean, I'm not a historian. I'm not a Revolutionary War historian. I'm an author, and I just thought that, well, we learned about the Revolutionary War in school. I just figured that it would be just sort of this natural progression, moving up all through the years, and sooner or later, people would just say, we want our own country, and I think it's time for us to declare we want independence. No. I tracked the guy down. I was talking to him about it. He said, no, people from the mid-1600s up until the end of the French and Indian War, people in the colonies were proud, happy to be part of the British Crown. They took pride in this, and they came here to the New World to start new families and new lives, new businesses, and they enjoyed the comfort and the protection of the British Crown. So revolution, what are you talking about, revolution? No, we don't want any revolution. It's just like, we're happy here, everything's nice. But then things started to change right after the French and Indian War. There were all these provisions about regulating business and trade and stamp acts and taxes. And a good portion of the population didn't like this. And as the years went on, they didn't like it more and more and more. Friction, tension started to build. And then they got to the point where things were getting real bad. And then the shot heard around the world, Lexington and Concord. After that, no turning back. So it was up until that point that everything was fine, but then things changed. This was the idea of, they didn't like the idea of tyranny. These regulations and these laws were coming from some king that nobody ever saw from across the ocean and telling us how to lead our lives, and we're going to be taxed for this, and we can't do that. No. And people were getting very angry about it. In my research, I sort of read in between the lines, and it was a pretty serious partisan divide, about 50-50. People who wanted revolution and people who didn't. Partisan divide, that sort of rings a bell these days, don't you think? Yeah, things don't change that much, do they? Interesting. So then people started making plans. And how are we going to, revolution, oh yeah, that sounds great, but what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? Well, we had a Continental Congress. They started putting together an army, and even then, I'm sure it was like, we're gonna fight the British Army. I mean, what are you kidding? This is like, it's crazy. This is the most powerful army on earth. But they put their ideas together, and I'll have something to show you in the slideshow. But that's what I learned as I was doing all this. Taverns this was the forum. This was a place where people were deciding upon their lives in the near term. Ordinary people? No. People were not ordinary back in those days. People were very knowledgeable. Everyday occurrences? No, these were historic times. People knew that. Simpler times? No, these were not simpler times. This is also the politics, business, religion. These were all things that were being discussed, and often discussed at a tavern. So then I had my journalistic instincts kicked in, and I said, I think I got a book here. It came out of nowhere. And I started, and as I was doing my research, I didn't find any, deep dives into this topic. The tavern to me was a window into local life back in those days. That's what I find interesting. It's, we joke about it. We say, what do people have for breakfast? I want to know that. So things like that. So I called my acquisition editor. I said, I think I might have a book here. He said, well, it sounds good. Keep going. When you're ready, you sign a contract. All right, and you will be off. So that's how this book came about. So taverns were the seedbeds of the revolution. This is where all these ideas, all these conflicting ideas were discussed. I also learned that the Loyalists and the Patriots actually had quite a lot in common up until a certain point. The Loyalists said, yeah, we don't really like all these taxes and we don't like what's going on, but let's negotiate. Let's take it one step at a time. No. The Patriots wanted to, these Patriots, they're a bunch of hotheads and smugglers and they don't want to listen to reason. Okay, well, maybe, all right, I don't know. So that's how the book came about. And I try in the book I'm always looking for the human interest angle. What did people do back then? How did they work? How did they live? What did they have to eat? How was their religion expressed? And so this was my quest, and I put the book together, and so here we are today. So I do have some slides to show you. So anyway, that's the background of the book. So do we have any reenactors here tonight? Okay. Members of the Daughters of the American Revolution, members of the Sons of Liberty, I tip my hat to the reenactors. The reenactors are very serious about history, about living history. That's where I like. The idea of living history. History is not something, especially with the Revolutionary War, history is not something that happened way 300 years ago and nobody really cares about it anymore. We're living the legacy of this history. It sounds funny to say, but from the mid-1600s on, this is how our lives were defined. Government, business, travel, religion. These people were doing all this stuff for the first time. And so we live this legacy. We're still living it today. And so the reenactors, I give them a lot of credit. Yes, they like to get dressed up and the buttons and the buckles have to be all the right way and they have to be in their proper uniforms, but they're very serious about their history. Now, these are the British reenactors, and these were the militia reenactors. These people take it very seriously, and this was at the reenactment of the Battle of Monmouth from a couple of years ago. Now, if you want to see something very impressive, I don't think they have it every year, but keep an eye when they do the reenactment of the Battle of Monmouth in Monmouth Park, and it's a impressive military operation. Soldiers are moving this way, that way, cannons are being shot, and there's hundreds of reenactors and even more people on the sidelines watching this. They're looking at, this is not history in the books. This is living history. This is what happened way back when. And they're presenting it. They take time out of their lives to do this. And so I give them a lot of credit. This is living history. I often get asked, well, what do you think, what was the most important tavern back in those days? Well, kind of hard to say. But I can tell you one of the most important taverns was this tavern in Haddonfield. Wonderful town way out on the west coast of New Jersey along the river there. And this is the Indian King Tavern. And back in the mid-1700s, it was a tavern. It was the house of some family. And it was operated as a tavern. And at the time, the assembly people here in New Jersey were on the run. They were passing ordinances and law, but the British were after them. So this is September 1777. The war's already on. So they went up to New Brunswick, and they went to Trenton, they came here to Princeton, and then they went to Haddonfield. So they went to this tavern, and the primary source documents still exist, or at least the transcribed primary source documents. And there is there's an installment, September 1777, and they issued a proclamation. They said, from this point forward, anytime there's a document generated here in New Jersey, a legal document, a financial transaction, a deed, New Jersey is to be known as a state, not a colony. State, not a colony. That's an interesting choice of words. They were all in. Yeah, they were all in. State, not a colony. And it operates, basically it's a museum. There are docents there. It's part of the New Jersey State, some state organization in New Jersey. You can go there and there are docents, they'll give you a tour. And you can go up to the second floor, and this is the place where these 40 plus guys met, and they decided on this. So this is where New Jersey became New Jersey, in a tavern on the second floor in Haddonfield. It's pretty important, I would say. Yeah, sure, okay. And when I do the books, I sign a contract, I have a deadline. I'm responsible for 50,000 words, but I'm also responsible for about 100 images. Now, I'm a pretty good photographer. I can take pictures. I go around the state and take pictures of structures that are still existing, or else I buy them from historical societies or museums, and they give me a break. But I had a challenge. Now, I'm trying to create a narrative here. I'm telling stories from the beginning to the end. I want people to know how I want them to understand what I'm talking about. I'm trying to do show and tell, just like a newspaper reporter. On your front page, you've got your front page photo and you've got your front page story, show and tell. So I figured, now how am I going to tell the story about what went on inside of a tavern? Obviously, there are no photographs, but there were genre artists, and these were skilled artists who were not interested in doing grand portraits and not interested in big landscapes. They wanted to do everyday life. They wanted to capture what was going on in their town, what were people doing. So a lot of them went to the tavern. And this is actually, I think this was a public domain illustration that I got online. It was done by a Dutch painter in 1668 or something. Now, it's not New Jersey, but it's what you would find in a New Jersey tavern back in those days. Now, you can see the people are dancing. Like I said before, the place to socialize. Dancing was a very important social skill. Forget about disco. Dancing back in the colonial period, you had to know how to dance. And if you wanted a boyfriend or a girlfriend, you really knew how to dance, because these were these country line dances. They were very flirtatious. You know, people would be doing this kind of stuff, and oh, hey, she's pretty hot. Yeah. So you had to learn how to dance. Now notice the fiddle player. This is before the design for the guitar had not yet been finalized. So the fiddle was the main instrument back in those days. That was the instrument. And then I always see something new in this painting. I mean, people say, how come the floorboards are like that and the rest of the floor is dirt? I said, well, I guess that was the dance floor, and there's a little girl with the doll. Can you see in the kind of the mid part of the picture there, next to that big cabinet or curio, can you see that's a tree, or looks like a tree? Somebody said to me, why is a tree growing in a tavern? I said, what are you talking about? What tree? And I looked. I said, oh, there's a tree. I said, I don't know. I guess maybe that was some kind of tradition to ward off evil spirits or something. I don't know. What's that stuff in the bottom there? And somebody's got their moccasins off, and there's all sorts. There's all sorts of interesting little things that you gain from this. So, genre artist. This is what it looked like back in those days. I wanted to get another picture. So this is more the tavern as a family institution. Everybody drank in those days. You can see the little kid there. You didn't drink the water, because if you drank the water, you got sick. People didn't quite understand the whole process of bacteria and hygiene. So everybody drank. What did they drink? Rum was the number one beverage of choice. And rum was also a big part of the colonial economic system. London, Barbados, and then they would take the molasses and bring it up to Perth Amboy. That's how they would sell the rum. Rum was the big seller back in the taverns. Number 2 was apple cider, and we have a good example of that back there. Probably not spiked, and probably didn't come from the apple orchards in Newark, which were the best orchards back in those days. So apple cider was number 2. Number 3 was beer. Who was the first person to brew beer in New Jersey? Well, probably it was a Dutchman by the name of Eert van Putten. And he bought property in Hoboken, right along the river, and he set up a garden, and he planted his orchard. He had a tavern, and he did his alcoholic fermentation process, and he brewed beer. Maybe there was somebody before him, but he's the first guy that I came across. 1665 or 6 or something like that. So Eert van Putten. Who was the first guy to have a tavern in New Jersey? Again, well, it gets a little, once you get into the 1600s, things get a little murky, but you do your best and you find at least somebody who was very early on, and that was a man named Henry Lyon. Henry came from Scotland, and he came to the New World. First, he landed in Connecticut, and then he heard that this is in the 1660s. It's interesting things were happening in this place called Newark. So he and his family went to Newark. He must have been a well-to-do man. He came to Newark, and he met all the big shots, and they decided to make him the treasurer of the town because he knew how to handle money. And there was an ordinance passed, and we still have the primary source document. It said that 1668, as soon as possible, our friend Henry Lyon is to establish an ordinary or a tavern or a pub, whatever it was called back in those days. The different words meant different things to different people in different parts of the state. So Henry Lyon was our first tavern owner, or at least I couldn't find anybody before him, so I'll go with Henry. And he became an important guy. He became a politician, and he was a property owner and things like that. So well-to-do guy. I always try to localize my talks where possible. I try to talk about, just last week I was talking to the DAR chapter in Bloomfield, and so I found some interesting things about there were taverns in Bloomfield, and Joseph Bloomfield did come there, and he made a speech. So I told him about that. And then I figured, Princeton, it's so much. So I figured, let me focus on a few things here. So I don't often read excerpts, but I will today. So on Saturday, August 27, 1774, John Adams, the future vice president and president of the United States, made an entry to his diary. He said, "Today I'm approaching the campus of Princetown," 2 words, known at the time as the College of New Jersey. The whole colony of New Jersey is a champaign, which, what is he talking about? That's sort of an antiquated term. It's an expanse of open country. A champaign, I never knew what that meant, a champaign. About 12 o'clock, we arrived in the tavern in Princetown, which holds out the sign of the Hudibras. The Hudibras. Now, that was a big tavern back in Princeton days. The tavern keeper's name is Jacob Heyer. So he arrived, I guess, in the morning, and then that afternoon, he met with Mr. Witherspoon, Princeton's first president and a signer of the Declaration of Independence. And they met at Princeton's McLean House. Does that still exist, McLean House? Okay. I'm not a Princeton guy. So, and they shared a glass of wine and had a nice chat. And John Adams said, "The government of this college is very strict and the scholars study very hard." I guess that's still true today. The president says they're all sons of liberty. All right. John Adams was passing through New Jersey on his way to the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia. September 5, 1774. And that's where the delegates gathered at the City Tavern. And of course, Revolution and Independence was being discussed. So they met at the City Tavern. They went to Carpenter's Hall, which is also in Philadelphia. Now this man, Jacob Heyer, he took ownership of the Hudibras in 1768. He was a tavern owner here in Princeton before that. And there is when he bought the tavern, he must have read this real estate ad in the local newspapers. They would advertise if somebody was buying or selling a tavern. They would put an ad in the paper, just like they would do today, and they would talk about the finer points of the tavern. To be sold at either a public or private sale, the noted and well-accustomed tavern, the Hudibras in Princetown, it's esteemed by all gentlemen acquainted with the road to be the best stand between New York and Philadelphia. That was we're the corridor state, Philadelphia, New York, Philadelphia. The house is new, has a cellar under the hole, and has 12 rooms. You could sleep there if you want, hospitality. 2 good kitchens, one of which is a loft over it with 2 good rooms, a good stable, needed that to take care of the horses, and a large loft which will hold 5 tons of hay. Well, what'd the Hudibras Tavern look like? Well, that's what it sounded like. Here's what it probably looked like. There's a nice chap here in Princeton. I tracked him down, Gus Escher, and I spotted this just by chance online. He had done there was a big, back in the 1980s, there was some big celebration here in Princeton, and I guess he was asked to draw a picture of what he could determine what the Hudibras looked like. And I found out who he was. I emailed him. I said, Gus, I love this picture. Can I use it in my book? He said, oh yeah, sure. And he even sent me a nice JPEG. So what did the Hudibras Tavern look like? Probably looked like something like that. Now, what did people eat in the tavern? Well, thanks to the Historical Society of Princeton, I learned that the dishes of the day were always beef and rabbit stew, and they were cooked throughout the day. Taverns often had a separate building for a kitchen because they were afraid that start a fire. They served wine, they served bread and cheese. Mr. Heyer had an alcohol stash, including Madeira and claret wine. You've ever had Madeira wine? Oh my God, it's just horrible. Oh, that was George Washington's favorite wine. I love George, but Madeira wine, it's not for me. Porter, gin, cider, whiskey, and beer. Dessert featured honey cakes, fruits, nuts, and wine. Sweet wine, I guess, maybe the Madeira wine. And he also offered customers long clay pipes, which they smoked after dinner. I guess that was a big tradition. Now, Mr. Heyer was a very well thought of hero here in Princeton. Heyer was every inch a colonel in the Continental Army. He was a good church member, a patriot through and through, and an ideal citizen. To the cause of freedom, he generously gave his life, and he was in the forefront of the fight. Students and professors found him to be a man ever ready to help a friend in need, with kind sympathy and a timely loan. He was an esteemed citizen, a man of consequence in the community. And he was born in 1736, died in 1785, so he lived through the end of the Revolutionary War. Is his grave in Princeton somewhere? Does anybody know? I would love to see the headstone. Mr. Jacob Heyer, I don't know. I'd love to get a picture of that. What happened to the Hudibras? Well, it was bought and sold and became different iterations of the tavern over the years. Finally, it was torn down, and it's located in where today is your Firestone Library. There's a garden in the front or on the side of the library. That's where it was. And just a couple of weeks ago, we had our open archive. And before they built the library, after they tore down the tavern, they did a dig, and they found artifacts. They found pieces of pottery and things like that. So they did document that. Hudibras, that's an interesting name. Hudibras. Who was Hudibras? Hudibras was the name of a grand satirical poem written by an English author, Samuel Butler. who I guess was pretty well, very esteemed author of the day. He published this book in the 1600s and 1700s. Now, I guess the students at Princeton at the time thought this idea of Hudibras was kind of cool. Hudibras was described as this bumbling knight, and all sorts of silly things that he did. He thought he was very smart, but he really wasn't. And it was designed to be satirical. It was like poking fun at the aristocracy and all their pretense and things like that. So that's where the name came from. Now, just outside of the Historical Society of Princeton, there's a marker. Route of Washington's march by night from Trenton to Princeton, and they were the victory in January 5, 1777. So they came through here, and they were on their way. Basically, they traveled along with what's today is Route 202, and they were on their way to their very first encampment in Morristown. So this was right after the 10 critical days, the historic retreat all the way through New Jersey. They landed the British were right on their heels. Washington had made arrangements for boats to be in Trenton. They sailed across the river, and just in time, the British were like a day or two behind them. And he set up a headquarters at a tavern in Pennsylvania. George Washington, he might be our greatest president ever. I mean, what he did, what he accomplished, he must have been a very charismatic leader. The men in the army were complaining that they weren't getting paid for their service, and they were basically wearing rags. I mean, they're doing this retreat like in November and December, and a lot of them didn't have proper footwear. And so he crossed the river, and then on December 25, Christmas Day, in the early hours of the morning, they crossed back into New Jersey. Now, I'm sure George Washington must have known that this was it. They were going to confront the British and the Hessians in Trenton. I don't know if George ever confided into any of his generals about this, but he must have known that this is it. This is the stand. If we fail here, the British defeat us, if we're captured, game over. No independence, no revolution. It must have been tons of pressure on his shoulder. So he must have known that. So, and I love these historic signposts that they have. Princeton Battlefield. They do a great tour there. If you ever go there, they have a little house in the back, and they sign up for tours, and they're very knowledgeable. They describe what was going on. They won a victory in Trenton. They captured the Hessians. All right, we got our first victory. Yeah. There weren't too many victories early on in George's tenure as the commander-in-chief. In fact, he had a lot of critics, including his own generals. And the Continental Congress was saying, George, come on, let's start winning some battles here, right? We're declaring revolution. So there was the first big victory. All right. Then they proceeded north, came to Princeton, fought on the battlefield there, and they either won or there was a standoff. Okay, now they got the wind at their back. So now it's getting winter setting in. They're going up and they're going to spend the winter in Morristown. Now, just to show you, this is the reenactors. I mean, we think of the Revolutionary War as this grand, wonderful. You're putting your life on the line here. These guys meant business. These guns would kill you. And so this is the Brown Bess, as they called it. Okay, Thomas Paine was a member of the intelligentsia back in Britain, and he met with Benjamin Franklin, and Franklin told him that you need to go to America. They need you over there. So the story is that his famous essay, The Crisis, these are the times that try men's souls. I called the Thomas Paine Society in Connecticut, and Yes, there probably excerpts of that were read to the troops before they crossed back into New Jersey, and yes, that did inspire them. So Thomas Paine, he's kind of gotten a bad rap over the years, and people have kind of forgotten about him. You know, this guy in his day was the most famous political, philosophical writer in the world. He came up with all the ideas of separation of church and state and representative forms of government. It's Thomas Paine. Yeah, it was developed by by Thomas Jefferson and other people, but he's the one that had those ideas. And this is a statue in Bordentown, lovely Bordentown. So there's George. Nice statue of him in Morristown on the green. George was, man, I tell you, I don't know how he did it. I don't know. This was the Arnhold Tavern in Morristown. It's not there anymore. It was torn. It actually burned down in the early 1900s. But this was his headquarters in the first encampment that they had there. And there's this wonderful statue of George and his horse in Newark. And statue was dedicated. I'm told it's one of the few statues where George is actually off of his horse, standing upright. So now, just real quick here, we still have a number of structures, old taverns that are still standing, still in existence, and for the most part, they operate as museum pieces, and they're usually run by a local historical society. So, so this is the Allen House Tavern in historic Shrewsbury. They still have events there. This is the Black Horse Tavern in Mendham, just a little outside of Morristown. It still operates as a tavern and a restaurant, and the building is still, it's authentic. They took all the good, cool stuff on the inside, and I don't know what they did with it, but it's not there anymore. Why did you do that? I don't know, it seemed like a good idea at the time. Well, no. A lot of taverns have been torn down. There's historic markers that still mark the place, but there are some taverns that are being rebuilt and being refurbished. And this is one in the town of Clinton, the Bonnell Tavern. Abraham Bonnell was a Revolutionary War, he was a colonel and a hero, and his seventh grandson, who's alive today, Hank Bonnell, is taking it upon himself. The family has owned this property, taking it upon himself. He's rebuilding the tavern, and he's going to have a real brew pub. And so that's going to become part of the Clinton scene in those days. So way to go, Hank. All right. This is France's Tavern in Lower Manhattan. That's on Water Street or Pearl Street or something down there. This is basically where my story ends, where the book ends. And it's a good way to sort of end this discussion because George Washington prevailed. We won the war. Holy moly. And so the Treaty of Paris, 1783, they were going to sign the Treaty of Paris and formally declare victory. And George Washington took it upon himself to invite all his top generals to France's Tavern. And in December of 1783, and they had this big celebration and a party, and they were making toasts, and people were making speeches, and everybody was crying. And without you men, without your courage and bravery, we could have never won this war. It's all up to you. So they had their party. Came downstairs, took the ferry boat across the Hudson River, landed in Jersey City, and made his way down to Annapolis. And that's where he handed in his sword. He said, "Thank you very much. It's been a great honor of my life to be leading this fine and wonderful army. We've won the battle for our independence. We've won the battle for revolution. Everything is great, and goodbye. I'm out of here." No, no, they pulled him back. He had to oversee the 100 days for the formation of the in Philadelphia of the Constitution. And then they said, well, is this going to be a monarchy? Is it going to be a republic? It's going to be a republic. All right. We need a king. We need an emperor. No. We need a president. Okay, we're going to have a president. Who's going to be the president? George Washington. Let's make him the president. George said, well, are you sure? He was the president for 2 terms. And after 2 terms, he walked away. He realized that too much consolidation of power, no good. So 2 terms, that's the tradition for, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was 4 terms, but that's became the tradition for 2 terms. He said, that's enough. I'm going back to my home in Virginia. And just out of curiosity, December 1783, I called the Library of Congress. I said, by any chance, do you have any newspapers from New York City from December of 1783? They said, well, yes, we do. And I said, do you have a story about George Washington and his generals meeting at Fraunces Tavern? They said, yes, it was on page 1 of December whatever. I said, I would be very interested if you could make a JPEG for me and send that to me. So I've got the news. It was a loyalist newspaper. They had the story, the news. That was big news of the day, that George Washington and his generals were at Fraunces Tavern. So with that, I will be very happy to entertain your questions, comments, complaints.
During that time, there was a change in the way tables were set. It's cutlery.
Mm-hmm.
The British way, which still exists, is for people to use their fork in the left hand and the knife in the right hand.
I don't do that.
And I heard it was during this time that the switch was made, and I can't remember what the reason for it was. But
it probably was that way in a tavern. Funny you mentioned that. There's all these little details that and people say, how did people arrange furniture in their houses? Was the furniture against the wall? Was it, we don't know. We don't know. Where was the table? That kind of thing. So I don't know the answer to that, but we have a gentleman here from England. Do you know the answer to that question by any chance?
No, except that we still have our knives in the right hand and forks in the left, and we don't change hands when we eat.
no,
I've lived here for 40 years in Cranbrook, so we still maintain that.
right.
Knife, fork. I eat this way.
But I understand it was during that time that that change was made, and that there was a reason for it.
Well,
I'll have to do some homework, I guess.
all these social customs, all things about business, politics, this is all being formed for the first time in this period. So yeah. There was somebody had a hand up over there. No, yes, I thought I saw somebody. Yes, in the back. Yes, sir. Oh, way in the back there.
Thank you. Were there taverns in New Jersey that were known to be entirely loyalist taverns?
I'm sure there were. They basically in the early days, you had loyalists and patriots. It was cordial, but then things started to change, and then the loyalists kept to themselves. And a good example of that, just outside of Clinton, there's a house that's being rebuilt. It was a loyalist house, the Vote House, V-O-U-G-H-T, and not far from the Vote House was Captain Jones's Tavern. Well, there was all sorts of confrontations going on. So one night, people at the Vote House said, let's go get this guy and teach him a lesson. So they went to his tavern, Patriot Tavern, and the loyalists gave him a little shaken up there. So yeah, so they early, they just had discussions about, like I said, they had a lot of things in common. They wanted to maybe see if they could negotiate, but yeah, so I'm sure there were loyalists, and I mentioned a few things in Bergen County. There were loyalist taverns. So yeah, they kind of kept to themselves, I guess, after a while. But then once the war broke out, then all bets were off. Yes, sir, with the microphone.
I was fascinated by your statement about singing and dancing in taverns.
Yes.
And there was a funny little thing at the end of the Revolutionary War where the Continental troops played a tune for the British soldiers as they were leaving, and it was an insulting tune. And the question is, how did people learn tunes?
It was all, this is the folk tradition. It's all oral history. Not much sheet music. Sometimes they recorded things. Mostly it was handed down. You know, Yankee Doodle. Yankee Doodle was sort of a derogatory. They were making fun of the Continental Army. Then Continental Army turned that around and they started, you know, Yankee Doodle went to London just to ride the pony. And that became a source of pride for them. But this was the folk tradition. This is how, you know, it's like, you know, Friday night open mic. People would get up and sing, and it's same thing back 300 years ago. And that's how you learn songs that were handed down. And these were often they were sung a cappella. And they were poems really more than songs. And a lot of women wrote them as well. And so they talked about their lives and their hardships and what it was like working. The weavers would have songs. The people on the tall ships had songs. These songs had, they were entertaining, but they also had there was like a practical application to them. People sang them because they wanted to, there was the drudgery of everyday life. So they would sing these songs, and this became part, so that became part of life, and that's the folk tradition. That's folk, and often these songs. It's funny that the songs, the culture crossed the ocean. Food, clothing, religion, and also the music. And there was a historian who tracked. He had this notion that the songs that were being sung in the British Empire would come over to the United States or the colonies, and he found these songs in places like Appalachia, and then he recorded them. So that's the. What's that?
There was a movie about
Yeah, that's, you know, so he played his hunch, and he was right. Yes.
Thank you for your presentation.
You're welcome.
Question, in that time frame, the 1770s, do you happen to know what the population was of the, quote, United States? And was most of the population at that point English immigrants?
I'd say there were mostly English immigrants. There were the majority, but there were a lot of Dutch people. There were a lot of Swedish people. There were a lot of German people. I don't know what the overall population was. I'm sure you could Google that. But like I say, there was, you know, when it came time for revolution, it was pretty much a 50-50 split, just like we have today in our country. Yes, sir.
The governor of New Jersey was Ben Franklin's son.
That's right.
And he was forced. He had to leave.
He
had to leave the country, right?
was arrested.
Was he
He
arrested?
was arrested. There was a meeting of colonial leaders. Where were they? In Burlington, and they put out a warrant for his arrest. And he was captured. Basically, went across. Eventually, they sent him over to England. That was in the Ken Burns documentary. So yeah. Yes.
We're over here.
Over here. Okay.
I just wanted to mention that Patriot Week is coming up.
Okay.
Because Washington crosses the Delaware on
Yes.
Christmas. And there's a lot of activities in Trenton and also in Princeton. And one of them, I believe, is a tavern crawl type thing, Colonial Tavern Crawl. If you look up Patriot Week
I
on
heard
the
about
internet,
that,
there's
yeah.
multiple
Yeah.
activities.
Yeah, I only go where I'm invited, so I don't want to crash any parties. But I heard about that, yeah. And there's a tavern talk group that's around somewhere in New Jersey.
They're doing like a pub crawl in Trenton, like they're doing a Colonial Tavern walk in Trenton.
Maybe, okay.
Look up Patriot Week and.
There's a group in Trenton called the First Rhode Island. The First Rhode Island it was called the Black Regiment
Okay,
because, well, initially in Rhode Island, in particular, and other places, the army was integrated. There were, black people
yep,
and
Yep.
white people in the same units.
yes.
But when things got bad after the Battle of Springfield and the Rhode Island regiments were decimated, they raised a regiment of mostly black and Native American people.
Okay,
And so there's a group in Trenton that portrays them.
okay,
And they host the pub crawl.
all right,
And so they're all in kit.
all right.
And but anyone's, welcome. and they go from
all right, if I,
pub to pub.
Yeah, yeah, that's, well, maybe, I don't know.
I wanted to say one other thing. I really like to talk and I'm going to buy the book. But with respect to loyalists and patriots, a few years back I heard a historian who studied loyalists in particular who say, no one got up in the morning and decided to be a loyalist.
Right.
Everyone was a loyalist.
Right. Well, that's what I said.
The revolution, the discontent began.
Until discontent began, until there was a lot of friction. That's why I said revolution would have been unthinkable. They came to this country because they wanted to start, they had a lot at stake. They had businesses, they had families, revolution, what do you, get out of here. I don't know, we don't want revolution, but, ideas changed. So, yeah, you're right. That's, yeah. Maybe people didn't wake up and become patriots either. I don't know. So, yes, back there.
You mentioned that voting took place in taverns.
That's right.
What was election day like?
It might have been election week. I'm sure it was I don't know if there were any conspiracy theories, but I'm sure they cast for the village politicians, or that's what they did. I'm sure it went on for a couple of days. So yeah, that was voting. Yes, sir.
Yeah, this gentleman mentioned pub crawls, and you've mentioned pubs, and as you can know, I'm from England. And I'd just like to point out the pub is still an incredibly important feature in every village. It's the focal point of the village. That's and right. It's not just good business for the pub, it's good business for the village because people come in.
That's right.
And of course, there are trivia nights that we're now starting to get in some taverns here. Even darts teams and darts boards. The Cranberry Inn has now got a darts board up, admittedly upstairs, which is not a very good place to put it. And then there are bowling alleys, and there are chess nights and backgammon nights. So it's really interesting that there's the correlation between the wonderful story you're telling about the colonial pubs and the British ones, which are still in existence.
Yeah, I love England. And whenever I go there, one time I was in England and I went across the river where they think Shakespeare had his Globe Theatre, that whatever part of London that is.
Avon River.
And somebody said, well, you're here, you should really go on a pub crawl on this street. And I did, and it was, I survived, so.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning the First Rhode Island Regiment. I mean, it's not all the people from New Jersey at that time were from Sweden, England, Germany, Scotland. There were a lot of slaves and a lot of natives.
Yes.
My question was related to women in the taverns. Were women welcome in the taverns as customers?
Women were welcome in taverns. There were a lot of women tavern keepers who owned the tavern, owned their own business, owned property, had their own money. There was a famous, somehow it survived. Anne Risley was a famous tavern owner in Absecon, just outside of Atlantic City. And the women did very well. Now, if the woman got married, well, honey, you've been doing a great job here, but I think I'm going to take over everything, and you just sit over there in the corner and leave it to me. That's what happened when you got married. So all the property went to the husband. So.
There are a lot of widows.
Right, yeah. I think Anne Risley was that.
Being a tavern keeper and being actuarial probabilities were pretty random back then.
Yeah.
And oftentimes the women survived and then they became tavern keepers, and oftentimes they did not want to remarry for the reason you just said.
Well, I think there was even a period here in New Jersey where women could vote back in those days, I think, right? Yeah, so yeah.
You mentioned taverns being a place where newspapers are shared. One of the most interesting things to do is to read those newspapers from those days. And the propaganda is just amazing. And that's another sort of link to today. It's pretty extreme.
Yeah, well, just like fake news.
Very interesting.
One of the big sources of information during my research, there are these online books that have excerpts of colonial newspapers. And you read these things, it's enlightening. It's like they're talking about local life and what people did back in those days. I got a lot of information because they, like that one excerpt I read, they would describe the tavern, where it was located, and all sorts of things about that. Yeah, so the news wars were, Yes.
Okay, we're from Dayton, which is a part of South Brunswick.
Okay.
And there's a famous tavern there, Whitlock Tavern. I don't know if you've stopped in there.
No.
But we were told that upstairs, speaking of women, was a brothel. So I wondered
Not
whether
surprising.
some of the other taverns that you've covered had that aspect.
I didn't get into that. You know, there were games of chance, whatever that meant. It was entertainment. I mean, entertainment could have been food, it could have been music, it could have been that stuff. You know, I try not to, you know, get too, like, let somebody else write that. You know, try to keep it clean here. So yeah.
Do we have one last question?
One last question. Going once, going twice.
Yeah. Okay, you got it, Bernie?
Before you leave, write down the Whitlock. You know, when I do these talks, this is how I learn stuff. Yeah, I mean, I knew that I was not going to write about every tavern. It's like with the diner books. I can't go to every diner in New Jersey. Crazy. You know, and I'm, you know, I don't get paid. You know, it's on my dime. You know, I have to go. So this sounds interesting.
Yeah, because George Washington came through South Brunswick on his way to the Battle of Monmouth, and he stopped, and the guys hung out there, and there was another tavern across the street, which is now a Wawa.
Okay.
And so George paid a bill for 14 pounds or something. I don't know what they bought. And then he continued on to the Battle of Monmouth. So they came through Kingston and then down Ridge Road and through Dayton, which is.
But I assume you didn't go upstairs, though.
Well, we don't know that.
We don't want to know that. Yeah.
So
do me a favor.
I'll give you that
before you leave. Write down, you know, and then give me your, you know, if I want to contact you, I'd like to know. And you could like steer me in the right direction.
Yeah.
This is how I find out stuff, you know.
Yeah.
Yes.
One thing that I know about taverns in the 19th century was that in order to get a tavern keeper's license, you had to have a half dozen people vouch for your good nature and good morals.
Yes.
And the question is, was that a new thing when it was the state of New Jersey, or did the colonial taverns also have that requirement?
Things are relative. You know, I have the excerpt from people stood up for Anne Risley, the woman I mentioned before. You know, she's done this great. You know, her husband was lost at sea, and she's done this great job running the tavern, and she's an outstanding woman, and she's honest and loyal. So yeah, you needed to have that kind of support from the community, because you know this was a big important part of the community. And like I said before, you know, the pubs, the taverns, you know, I said earlier they were mandated almost by the local villages would say, you know, we need to have a tavern for social life, but also because everybody's traveling through New Jersey. New Jersey's always been the corridor state. You got to go through New Jersey to get to anywhere. So they needed that, yes.
But they weren't financed by the state, were they?
No, you had to be an individual of some means. Yeah, so yeah, you had to do that. They were taxed, and they were expected to keep up the roads and things like that. There was a lot to it, but yeah, they were. That's what it is to being a tavern keeper. So yes, it was important, not only for the social aspect, but for the business aspect, yes.
I think they also had stables.
They had to take care of the horses, sure.
Cranberry Inn.
Yes, that's right, the Cranberry Inn, yeah. Yeah, because, you know, the horses got tired, and they need to be, you know, washed down and fed and things like that. Yes?
I have a question for the room, because you were talking about Hudibras, and I grew up in Princeton, so in the 60s and 70s I lived here, and in the early 80s, there was a bar called Hudibras, I think.
Where Triumph was originally.
So I guess they
right?
were, yeah, does anyone know? Am I not remember?
Where the Triumph used to be.
Where what used to be? Oh, the Triumph, yeah.
Before Marita's Cantina.
It was just named after it.
Okay, so they named it after the, yeah.
Bowling alley, a movie theater.
Sorry, that was not that interesting.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that, so, yeah.
The name lived on.
Yeah, so, you know, when I do these talks, I often learn about, did you know there was no, I didn't know that. You know, I've got a file now. Taverns that didn't get into the book. You know, yeah, I mean, you know, I can only do so much, you know.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you very much. You've been a lovely audience.